Hey, I am Hannah. This is survey teardown number 21, I believe, and we are looking at an email from Harry's. Harry's is a very cool company that I am subscribed to, and they send us razors, very nice, very good razors every month, or I think it's like every 3 months is what we have signed up. It's really cool. I have always had an issue like picking a good razor that doesn't like cut me when I'm shaving my legs, and Harry's is great. So this is an email here that they're inviting us to do a survey, and we've got a great prize here of like winning a $500 American Express gift card, a raffle. That's something I use as well as an incentive. A raffle, it kind of keeps costs low on the business side, but also you can amp up what the cost of the value of the incentive is, which is always nice. And so this is great. It's an 8-minute survey, and they want to, let's see what they say, interested in learning from our customers so we can keep improving our products, offering an experience. Would love your opinion through the survey linked below. One thing that I would say is like this seems a little bit buried. It was mentioned in the subject line, which is great. But I would always lead with this. Like if someone is skimming, you want them to see this pretty quickly. This is a nice thing, a nice incentive. So really put that incentive first and foremost, since that is what we're using to kind of drive folks to complete the survey and participate. So lead with this, but I do think the fact that they've kind of introduced themselves, which is really nice, and then mentioned what the survey is about, so you at least have some context. That's always helpful, very personable. Okay, let's look at the actual survey itself. All right, so it should take you less than 10 minutes for your time. Nice reinforcement here. All right, let's take a look. I've mentioned this in the past. I love this bar, but the bar is great if you move through it quickly. When you're not moving through it quickly and you only get like a little bit of a push, it can be demotivating. And so you want to be really careful with that. Like how many questions do you have? Like how strong is the incentive and the commitment, so that you're not getting folks like participating half the way and then dropping off. Okay, so which of the following do you most closely identify with? All right, so we're starting with a little bit of a demographic information. That's fine. I personally recommend leading with what you're most interested in to start, and so you can kind of capitalize on the momentum. That said, it is always helpful to lead with something that's like kind of easy and straightforward, so that you set the precedent of like, hey, this is a very easy non-taxing survey. Okay, so do you or any members of your household currently work in any of the following industries? This is kind of an interesting question. It just sort of made me pause. Usually it's about my role, like as someone taking this survey. So I'm curious where they're headed with this question. But I mean, it seems harmless enough. I think that just paying mind to how much of this information is important at this particular stage, like just being really deliberate with your choice of questions so that you're not introducing survey fatigue within a single survey. Okay, what type of shampoo do you typically use regularly? So this stumped me because I was like, why are we talking about shampoo? Like Harry's sells shampoo? And so what they do in the next question is, we're interested in learning more about your general attitudes towards grooming. So some context like that would have been helpful here, because this just felt irrelevant to me, and it made me second guess. And I thought, am I still in this right survey? And I kind of doubled, like clicked and then went to the next question. So you want to minimize the confusion that the participant is experiencing. And a quick line like they did in front would have been helpful, just to say, are they exploring this product line? What is the context here that that this question is coming into, so that I, as a participant, have a frame of reference. You want to take people out of cognitive dissonance as quickly as possible when you're asking them to do something like a survey. And so little gestures to minimize confusion, to explain, to orient, as much as you can without introducing too much information that might A, overwhelm, or B, bias your insight, because there is always value to kind of not always prompting them and seeing what their initial reaction is. But a little bit of context, I think, would go a long way here. And then also the framing of the question. What type of shampoo do you typically use regularly? This feels a little bit clunky. And so I would just pick one or the other, and then use the same language here. So if you're using typically, which type of shampoo do you typically use, or do you use regularly? I don't use shampoo, or I typically don't. That's fine. But yeah, just kind of tighten that question phrasing up, so you're minimizing any chance that someone can stumble. Really deliberate with word choice here. First, you're interested in learning more about general attitudes towards grooming. So this is good context. Please think about any cleaning or grooming you do to your face, hair, or body. So this is a nice, like, setting up the scenario-ish. Like, you're telling me how to think about the question before I answer it, which is really helpful. Interestingly here, so a 4-point scale is great in that it forces you to have an opinion, right? So I either have to pick this side, or I pick this side. This is a bit of an unusual scale. Normally you have like a disagree through to an agree. That's a little more familiar, and this does take a second to orient to. So if there's value in having both sides of the spectrum, like I enjoy the experience of grooming, you would expect this to be the opposite, and it basically is. So I wonder if like an agree disagree 4-point scale might be easier, so it's less reading. My grooming helps me stand out feels kind of similar to like my grooming routine helps me feel confident in my own skin. I mean, I get I think there's a slight nuance there, right? Like one is stand out to other people, one is feeling confident in myself. But that's something that I'm picking up on because I've taken a look at some like personality surveys and nuances there. So I wonder if these are intended to be opposites, that maybe a disagree-agree scale is a little bit easier here, especially since it's like duplicate. It takes a sec to like, oh, okay, right. I pick this side, or I pick this side. So the 4 points good, you get a commitment, right? But people who don't have an opinion are now forced into an opinion. So on the one hand, that's good. You get opinionated data, but it's not always accurate because what if, like in this case, they have to answer, right? You've got that asterisk here. So if they don't have an opinion, they might just like it's not necessarily as accurate. They don't have like a place to fall in the middle. That's not always a bad thing though. Sometimes you do want to push people because they might be kind of on the fence and default to neutral if it takes too much work to figure out how to answer the question. So this is good in that regard. But you do want to weigh out like the value of pushing them and then the compromise of the kind of risk in the data of pushing them too. And yeah, being really clear in like the opposites. I always like to minimize the work for the participant. So that would mean, in this case, swap, like putting the antithesis of this over here. Because the assumption is these are opposites. So making it clear, like my grooming routine helps me stand out, feels different from this. So I would almost put this as like a separate question, maybe. I enjoy the experience of grooming, and these do feel like opposites. So yeah, I just think that when you're pitting two things against each other, making it really, really crisp and really clear. If this is about like self versus standing out to people, making that crystal clear. But again, it's always going to be helpful when it comes to these types of nuances with like usability testing the survey and seeing how folks respond. All right, now we're interested in learning more about your attitudes towards shopping for and grooming products. Great. Appreciate the context and the pivot. And we've got a similar format, which is nice to have that carryover, right? Because I already oriented on this slide, and now I get to use what I learned from there to apply to that same orientation here. Okay, I'm okay with shopping for a new grooming product online. I need to see a product in the store before purchasing the first time. So these do feel like more explicit opposites. I wonder if there's a way to like say them as more direct opposites, so it's just easier on the brain. It's like lighter cognitive load. I'm open to trying new brands of grooming products. I tend to purchase different grooming brands. These feel like quite similar, right? Trying new brands versus if you're open to trying, I guess there's a slight difference. Being open to trying and actually purchasing new brands. I'm fairly set in my ways, or versus I prefer to purchase from a single brand. So I think that there's some opportunities here to like just be a little bit more concise and tighten up what the real ask is. Sometimes we will use, and I'm not necessarily saying that's the case here, it's difficult to weigh in on these without knowing the ultimate goal and then the individual question goal. But it does help to like if some of these feel a bit overlapped, sometimes we don't need the opposite. We just have them weigh as like an agree or disagree on this particular statement. And then this can sometimes like muddy things a bit. So I think there are opportunities to be a bit more tight and concise and distinct. Like each of these, if we are choosing, they really need to stand out. It needs to be pretty obvious and not invite people to sort of stumble and be like, well, I don't know, like how different are they? Because if they can't figure out the clear difference, they're going to start picking on individual words to understand the difference. And then that means your word choice does need to be like very, very crisp and very deliberate, because you don't have someone here interpreting the survey for you. So it really needs to be able to like stand alone and be interpreted in a consistent way across multiple participants or survey takers. Okay, lastly, we're interested in learning more. So I read this and then I look at like the 28% and I'm like, so I think it's helpful to do like sections maybe, or not use this lastly in this section, or you have a title with a section. But I do appreciate the like want to sort of let me know, hey, we're edging towards the end at least of a section, because there feels like some sort of completion there, which is helpful mentally to keep going. I stay on top of the latest fashion trends. I'm not concerned. So this one is like, they're interested in learning more about your attitudes towards life in general. I wonder if this is like a personality-ish question, that it just really helps you understand. It's very effective with marketing, like personality-driven marketing, to understand like the introverts and the extroverts and the which category on that like ocean personality scale, where each letter in ocean is a particular personality trait. So this is interesting. I'm so curious about what they're doing with this, and I'm very intrigued about like the backdrop of this, and if there are if this question, so this is like on its own here, right? And then we look here, and then this is this still part of that? I don't necessarily think this is part of that. This feels like the one question to understand attitudes towards life in general. So I'm super curious about like the backdrop of this. Sometimes I think that, is it attitudes? Is it like personality? This is an interesting one to see like where people sit. I wonder if there are any like biases of like, well, I don't want to say that I don't stay on top of the latest fashion trends, or does staying on top mean I have to follow them? Does it mean that I'm aware of them? Versus, well, this is pretty helpful in that like, okay, you're either concerned with them or not, but whether or not you follow and stay on top is different to like whether you stay on top knowledge wise. So it just gets a little nitty gritty if someone doesn't have an impulse reaction of like, oh, for sure, I totally stay on top, or no, I don't even care. But when they're unsure, or like myself, who's kind of like, oh, well, what do I want to say about me? And I hesitate, and then I want to understand like I think through the options, and then that's when, again, word choice becomes really important to be able to decipher. How would you describe your personal involvement? This feels like a question, and another one later on. I feel like this is something that when they first introduce like hair care and styling products, feels kind of like a very easy question to kick off with. So we've gone into like, we did the demographics, then we slipped into these types of like rating scale questions. Then this question feels like a nice entry into the bridge between like a demographic and then the rating scale questions, right? So it's like an easy, it kind of feels like a little bit of a back step. You want to like graduate into each section of the survey. So you lead them through, and even logically they're like, oh, okay, because maybe if they say they don't really they use whatever's in the bathroom or on hand, or someone else decides which to buy and purchases them, maybe you won't ask certain brand questions, right? Like about whether they try new brands or purchase different grooming brands, because that might be captured here. So I think there's some overlap that might be able to be synthesized if we have a lead-in question like this and then filter out this section based on their answers here. So just some food for thought. Would like to ask about some brands and products you might use for dandruff and scalp care. So question may be preceding, and I think, I mean, if they're asking scalp care, it's maybe a question is like, before we get to this, what if it's not relevant for me? Do you use products for dandruff and scalp care before leading into this? Especially because this is a question that is quote unquote work. Like I have to enter information into here. So if I and I hear they're asking here, like, what brands and products do you think of? But I guess it depends then, like what the goal is. So do they want to know from people who just know about these brands in general, or do they want to know from people who have actually used these brands? So this question actually might be okay. I kind of glossed over this part when I was talking 2 seconds ago. So this question might be okay if their goal is to just get a pulse on like, what brands do you associate with dandruff and scalp care? And now they're asking, which ones have you ever heard of? So this one was like, was fine, kind of clicked through. And then this one, which of these would you consider purchasing? So here I would say like, is maybe none of these, or like I don't have, like something where you can opt out of dandruff. I don't know that like none of these can mean like, well, maybe I would use something for dandruff, but I wouldn't use any of these. Is different to this question is actually not relevant for me because I don't use anti-dandruff products. So if that distinction is important, it's helpful to include it here. And then you might want to separate out the data, like someone who knows about dandruff products might have a different list to someone who, and here as well, to someone who doesn't know and doesn't need anti-dandruff products. So if that data is important, cool. It doesn't seem like it is since they haven't parsed it out. How interested you be in purchasing each? So this again assumes that you use anti-dandruff products. And this is one of the ones that I've talked about in the past, right? It's like a future focused question, like how interested would you be about purchasing these? I always lean to like, if this question is important, if a purchase question is important, and I don't think that the data is accurate on these because again, we're horrible at predicting the future. Can you set up a scenario? Can you set up an instance where you're recreating that future event, so they're actually making a decision now about deciding? They're choosing which ones would they buy, and that way it's a future scenario that you're painting now, so that response is to do with now. Especially since we don't really know, like, is this person even interested in anti-dandruff products at this point? So yeah, just stepping away from these future. I mean, it's really tempting, right? We're like, hey, would you buy this thing? The answer that you get feels very clarifying, but it is risky data, and even more risky when in a survey, because we get like a volume of data, right? We're tapping a much larger group. So something to be mindful of. Which statement best describes your experience with each brand for the anti-dandruff products prior to this survey? This seems fine. These are based on like now they're wanting additional details. So I would actually probably put this question on the back of when I mentioned these are the ones that I think of, or if I can't remember if they're pulling from here or here. But I would pop this question on the back of that, right? So it's a bit more of like continuous. So you're not pulling on different threads when you're inviting someone down a survey. Like you are very focused and logical. It helps them build on the information. They don't have to like remember back to it. Not too much remembering back here anyways, but the continuity is very helpful in survey design. And I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I've used it before. Okay. Do you follow Harry's on social media? So this is something that I think is a question that's like helpful to pop right at the end. Especially since now we jump back into more data collection. And here, where do you typically purchase anti-dandruff products? And again, this assumes that I do, or I say I don't purchase anti-dandruff products. That's great. So this feels like a question that maybe would have been better to come earlier and then driven. Like if I say I don't purchase these products, then I can get tailored questions accordingly. So if you still ask about anti-dandruff products, then you can say, hey, we just want to get a pulse on like what are the most popular brands. So this feels like a question that would be great to lead in as opposed to like after the fact. Household income. I would almost tag this like demographic up at the front when you're asking about age, income, race, have you purchased Harry's? Like this feels very qualifying. These feel like kind of straightforward kickoff questions that either I group them all at the end or group them in the beginning. So they're easy points to answer. Like, have you purchased Harry's for yourself or someone else? So I'm introducing these questions. These feels like a start of the survey type question. This as well. I'm a current Harry's customer versus former versus never tried Harry's. Even though they're for classification after the fact, I think there can be a lot more like tailoring of the questions, even the phrasing and the messaging, and using skip logic to then identify like what are the right questions to point someone to based on their answers here, since these are qualifiers, right? Like we're classifying people into groups. So it's always nice to do that at the outset. And then even if the questions are the same, they naturally do feel like, oh, I've never tried Harry's, I'm a former Harry's customer. They feel like the questions following are personalized based on what they're answering here. And that's always a good thing. How do you typically purchase your Harry's items? That's fine. Oh, this is something else. So, and then I think there was like one more question that was more demographic, and then the survey ended. So a lot of things here about like structuring and positioning and just making it easy that someone is not jumping around the survey in their head. It's like a very intuitive design and sequence, which really, really does help with, especially with a long survey. Actually, yeah, this went into like, they just sort of mentioned and asked about anything else, and then there's mention about the credits. I didn't submit the answers because I wanted to kind of capture this and just sort of clicked through to get a better sense of the survey. So I didn't submit the answers here, which is why I didn't go all the way through. But yeah, really paying attention to like, it does take legwork up front to figure out how to position these surveys so that you're thinking of all the things that stop your user and participant from having to think of them. So they're not stumbling at all because you've really been meticulous with like how you have paved the road, asking very deliberate, specific questions so that the data that you're getting is exactly what you want. You've identified the groups and the classifications up front. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next survey teardown.